Welcome everyone. I'm Mike Shanahan again, the Planetarium Director at Liberty Science Center. It's called the Jennifer Chalsty Planetarium, and at 90 feet in diameter, it is the largest planetarium in the entire Western Hemisphere, definitely the largest in all of America. So we are excited to announce that we are bringing back our Science Center and our planetarium as of this weekend, Labor Day weekend. Friday, that's tomorrow, the 4th of September, we are open for members only from 10 to 4. And we'll have planetarium shows every hour. And the rest of the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, we're open 10 to 5. And we'll have planetarium shows every hour during the day there. So in hopes I'll see some of you who've been our loyal online audiences in our mothership while we are closed, and for the month of September still. We're going to be using our Digistar equipment, the same system we use in our actual planetarium, to bring the planetarium to you on your home screens. Now, because of that, it's high quality, high resolution. You may want to make your screen as big as you possibly can, especially as I'm pointing out some fine detail in the nighttime sky. So also in the chat here, we do have Krista, who will be answering your questions about astronomy. So put those in the chat if you do have questions about that. We are trying to carry on the flame of astronomy education and STEM education throughout New Jersey and the world. So if you want to support us, there is a donate button. The official button is a little bottle cap that has a heart in it. That is the official way to donate to Liberty Science Center as we try to carry on our astronomy and education missions as we have been doing these last 175 days of our closure. So we are doing these shows every week, and the show next week will be about black holes. Every show we do, including this one, is archived at LSC in the House. And so all of our past shows, and we've done 23 of them now, are right there to be viewed on our homepage. If you want to learn about aliens or the supermoon or getting humans back to the moon, all of our shows are there if you want to check some of those out. Okay, so again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. The show itself here will last about 25 minutes. And if you have questions at the end, we'll leave some time for questions there as well. So that said, let's go ahead and go to where all astronomy has its origins. In this case, the nighttime sky that you would see this very evening at 10 o'clock in the evening. So here we are, we're looking towards the south. We do have a just past full moon. The moon was full on Tuesday. This is the full corn moon, according to Farmer's Almanac. Now, occasionally you see these moon names being attributed to vague Native American sources. I've never seen anything that says, as an original source, this is called the corn moon by this or that Native American people. But it is a term, it's kind of a handy one. It is not the harvest moon. The harvest moon is the full moon nearest to the first day of fall. The first day of fall this year is on the 22nd of September, so the full moon nearest to that is on October 1. So there's going to be a full moon on the 1st of October, which means there will also be a full moon on the 31st of October. Yes, for the first time in 19 years, we have a full moon on Halloween. And having two moons in 1 month also means the second moon, the Halloween moon, is also known as a blue moon. There's a lot of argument about what the origins of that term. My favorite explanation, which apparently is completely bogus, is that the term blue moon came from the French word for double, which is double. So I can easily see how double would turn into bleu, or blue moon. Apparently that's been debunked, but I still like to think of it that way. So anyway, that's for Halloween. We will have a full moon on Halloween for the first time since the year 2001. Okay, so looking at our sky here, we're looking at the just past full moon, and looking towards the south at 10 o'clock tonight, there's a lot to be seen. So we are in a nice dark location, darker than we normally get. Maybe those of you in Albuquerque will get a better view of that Milky Way, for example. But we do have, for example, the last hurrah for seeing this great constellation of the summer called Scorpius the Scorpion. So that is going away very shortly. We're losing the great stars of the summertime pretty quickly here. So the Scorpion, it'll be very low and a little hard to catch already as it's getting down there. But an important thing is the bright star that is circled here, the bright star in the scorpion is called Antares, which means in Greek, the rival or antagonist of Mars. As you may know, Ares is the Greek word for the same god that the Romans called Mars. And the antagonist or rival of Mars, so called because the color of Antares is the same color as Mars. And often, the planet Mars is the same brightness, but not now. So right now, as Mars draws closer to the Earth, Mars is flaring in brightness. And tonight at 10 o'clock, if you're out there with a clear sky, and most of the weekend apparently is going to be very clear, so this is going to apply throughout the weekend as well. At 10 o'clock, you can catch Antares going down in the Scorpion and compare it to the brilliant blaze of Mars, which is just rising at 10 o'clock tonight. Mars is almost -2 magnitude. So Antares is a non-variable star. It's a nice, steady first magnitude star. First magnitude means that the star is really bright. I mean, just as in Hollywood, a star of the first magnitude is a really prominent movie star. First magnitude stars are the brighter stars, but there are some dots in the sky that are brighter than first magnitude. And you have to give them negative numbers if they're brighter than first magnitude. And Mars tonight here on the 3rd of September is blazing away at nearly -2 magnitude. So many times, about 15 times brighter than the star that resembles it. Now, Jupiter is also in the sky tonight, so if you look due south here, Jupiter is at -2.5. So right now it outshines Mars, but that will change in October. So if you want to find Jupiter, look south at 10, blazing away, and then if you look over to the left, about the width of one palm, you can find Saturn as well. So 3 planets lined up, plus the moon tonight at 10 o'clock. Take advantage of that if it clears up. And then we also have the other planet that is also the star of our show, the planet Venus, that you're going to have to wait till the morning sky to see. So here it is at 10 o'clock, and we'll now go through the evening. World's going to turn, and so new stars rise, old stars set, and here we are. We'll stop just before the first light of dawn. So here in the morning sky, now it's now the 4th, the first day of the 4-day weekend, 5 o'clock in the morning, you can already see Orion the Hunter. So Orion is a wintertime constellation, but it's already visible before dawn, blazing away in the morning sky like an old friend that comes back every early autumn or late summer. But bright as Orion is, it's nowhere near as bright. None of its stars are as bright as the brightest single dot in the sky at -4 magnitude. The planet Venus is blazing away in the morning sky and is going to stay there all the way through the fall, all the way to the end of the year, of calendar year 2020. So at -4 magnitude, Venus is roughly 6 times brighter than Jupiter and far brighter than any star in the sky. So Venus also only appears around sunset or before sunrise, being near the sun. You always see it at the lovely times during the year. It's a beautiful sight, lovely times during the day, I should say. It's a beautiful sight, always seen around dusk or around dawn. Maybe that's one reason why long ago, going back to the Babylonians, it was identified with Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, or called Ishtar in Babylon, Aphrodite by the Greeks. Here's a famous portrait by Botticelli, the 15th century Italian painter. I had to crop it a little bit to be a totally G-rated show, but very famous painting showing you evoking the beauty of Venus. Venus opposite from Mars, so Mars, maybe because Mars has that slightly reddish hue that reminded folks of either fire or of blood. Long ago, Mars became identified with warfare and with bloodshed and with fire. So Mars is kind of a joke to the Greeks. He was kind of a buffoon. We'll see a picture of him drunk next to Venus in a moment. But for the Romans, as you probably know, conquered a large part of the Mediterranean, Mars was their most important god. The word martial comes from Mars. And actually, the Roman year originally began with the month March, named after the god Mars. And if you think of it, our current month, September, and October, and November, and December, only makes sense if you begin your year in March, because September means 7 months, October means 8-month, November is 9-month, and December is 10-month. Doesn't make sense unless you know that the year used to begin in the month of Mars. So although opposites, if you know anything about rom-coms or mythology, opposites are often attracted to each other. So here is the courtship of Mars with its purple crest and Venus from Pompeii. We know exactly how old this fresco is because Pompeii was buried in ash from Vesuvius in 79 AD. And most of the frescoes you see here are now visible at the wonderful archaeology museum in the city of Naples. So here's kind of an elegant portrait of the two. Sometimes they're not quite so elegant. Mars, again, has elements of being a buffoon. So in another Botticelli painting, in this one, definitely Venus is the adult in the room. You have Mars pretty much inebriated as little satyrs and whatever take away his weapons of war and even try on Mars's giant helmet. So Botticelli had a good sense of humor as well as being a wonderful, wonderful painter. So there we have it, those two opposites. And it's kind of a good idea that they're considered opposites that are in some ways drawn to each other because they're the two planets that are on opposite sides of Earth and have a lot of things in common with Earth and a lot of things that are completely different from our home planet. And so we're going to be talking about that in the course of our show. 1609, Galileo invents the telescope, and by 1612, he had turned it on the planet Venus. So as with Mars, the view of Venus in a telescope is both baffling and intriguing. So right away, Galileo noticed an important thing about Venus. It went through phases. And there is no way to explain the sequence of phases that Galileo saw if you believed, as most folks did in the 17th century, that the Earth was the center of the universe. If, on the other hand, the Earth and Venus were both orbiting the sun, then the phases of Venus made perfect sense. This is what convinced Galileo to become a supporter of the Copernican view of the universe, that the sun had to be at the center of the solar system, not the Earth, which led to a lot of hot water for him, of course, but also helped to establish the fact that, yes, indeed, we are not on Earth the center of creation. So the clouds that cover Venus also make it very hard to impossible to see anything on the surface of it. Now, Venus is often called our sister. Why is that? Well, in large part because it's the nearest planet in size to us. So Venus is only about 400 miles smaller in size than Earth is. So Earth is 8,000 miles in diameter. Venus is about around 7,500. And made of pretty much the same stuff. And it is the planet that draws nearest to planet Earth, within 25 million miles. Now, science fact, it is not the planet that's nearest to us the majority of the time. Actually, Mercury spends more time close to Earth. I mean, of the three near planets to us, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, Mercury spends more time closer to Earth than the other two planets that are near to us do. But Venus is, in fact, the one that gets the closest to us. 25 million miles is a drop in the bucket in terms of distances in astronomy. And yet our sister is a very twisted sister in many ways, an utterly different world. Now, once upon a time, back in the 1930s, this is a little still from our show about the search for aliens, there is some speculation that maybe Venus might have life on it. Being near the sun and a cloudy world, maybe it was a tropical, if cloudy, paradise with water everywhere and really warm temperatures. And in this imagining by Frank Paul, the illustrator from the 30s who tried to do scientific ideas of life on other planets, maybe a place that had dinosaur-type creatures wandering around and flamingos, and maybe it was lush. And when Ray Bradbury wrote a short story about the planet called The Long Rain, where he imagined a rain world where the rain was so intense on Venus that it would drive astronauts crazy as the rain banged upon their spacesuits. But with the 70s and learning more about Venus, we very quickly came to realize there is no place more inhospitable to life than the nightmare world of Venus. And ironically, what makes Venus so beautiful, its clouds, help to make it awful. The clouds are largely made of sulfuric acid. And the clouds, combined with the thick atmosphere of Venus, traps heat on the surface in an absolutely out of control greenhouse. So down here on Venus, it is always 870 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. Virtually the entire atmosphere is made of carbon dioxide, 96% of the atmosphere, and that's a very good heat-trapping gas. Amazingly, the Soviets were able to land a couple of spacecraft on Venus called Venera missions, and this one here lasted about 2 hours before the pressure and the heat destroyed the spacecraft. But the pressure, about 92 times thicker than the air at sea level on Earth, is like being half a mile down in the ocean. And the heat, again, 870 degrees, things just can't survive on Venus for very long. So this mission from the Soviets landed did show us that light does get through. It's about as dark as a winter's day in Moscow is how they described it. But very hostile environment down there on the surface. Now from a safer distance, the Magellan mission in the 90s, early 90s, was able to radar map all of Venus. So we have a really good idea of the geography of Venus. So most of it is rolling plains, kind of like Iowa. They would be oceans if there were to be water on Venus, but at 870 Fahrenheit, of course, there's no water here. And there's some uplands, a little kind of mountainy thing called Bara, and then 2 large continents. But a big debate about Venus was whether or not it had active volcanoes. It has a lot of volcano craters, so it clearly had a lot of volcanism in the past. But being obscured by clouds like it is, it was hard to figure out until recently whether to decide if it had active volcanoes or not. That was actually decided on just recently, as we'll get to in a moment. So here it is, unbearably hot, enormous pressure, sulfuric acid clouds, really a horrible, no good place. And not only will we never have humans there, even sending a rover there is a very complicated issue because of what would have to survive. Now, in terms of volcanoes, so a recent mission to Venus called the Venus Express by the European Space Agency was able to do some surveying around some of the mountains on Venus. And so here's a mountain as seen by the Magellan spacecraft from the 90s. And the new mission, the Venus Express, was able to figure out that certain areas on this mountainside show that the material is newer, is fresher than the material around it. The stuff in red here was deposited recently and is almost certainly caused by flowing lava. So that seemed to answer the mystery. In fact, we do believe that there's active volcanism on the planet Venus. It has more volcanoes than Earth does, about 170 or so. It has craters spread all the way across the planet. But here's a fun fact about Venus. It has no small impact craters. Now think about that for a moment. Why would it be that Venus would not have any of the small impact craters like you see on the moon all the time? Fact is, with that thick atmosphere, small asteroid bits don't make it through. They burn up in the thick atmosphere of Venus. So that's one advantage of Venus, is that only the big asteroids can get through and strike the surface. And so it's only the impact craters on Venus, of which there's very evenly spread around the planet, are only the large ones, because only the big asteroids make it through and strike the planet Venus. So the old days, billions of years ago, Venus did have water. It was a more Earth-like planet. That it shares in common with the planet Mars. So what happened? Well, part of it may be being near the sun. More of the water evaporated, but the recent thinking is that's not enough to explain why all the water would have gone away. So one theory is that as the water evaporated, another thing that Venus does not have is a strong magnetic field. The magnetic field of Earth protects us from solar radiation. On Venus, as the water vapor rises, you have wind from the sun that comes by and can strip away the water particles. So maybe the solar wind and the fact that Venus is so exposed to it was another factor in all of the water being stripped away from Venus over time. But whatever the cause, Venus slowly lost its water and turned into the current hellacious environment that we know today. Only a tiny percentage of our Earth's atmosphere is carbon dioxide. 96% of the air here on Venus is carbon dioxide, and so able to trap heat in a very efficient way. North Pole at midnight, it is still 870 degrees. The only relief is that if you went up on one of the high mountains like Maxwell Montes on Venus, 7 miles high, higher than any mountain on Earth, if you climb to the top of the highest mountain on Venus to get relief from the 870-degree temperature here, the temperature would plunge at the top of that mountain to 715 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the only break you're going to get. So a fascinating world, but also a really interesting example of out-of-control greenhouse effect, and a good example of how utterly different planets can evolve, even if they're neighbors. And this has a lot of application as we're talking about finding planets around other stars. There's a lot of talk about finding planets near other stars that are in the Goldilocks zone, in the right place, not too far, not too close to their sun, for water to exist as a liquid. So an alien around, say, Alpha Centauri looking at us may see 3 planets in the Goldilocks zone. They may see Venus and Earth and Mars and think that all 3 of them would have the right conditions for water and therefore for life. But as we know from actual experience, at least in the case of Venus, it's evolved into a land that's utterly inhospitable to any form of life. So learning lessons that we can then apply now that we're discovering that many, many stars have planets and even whole solar systems around them. So that is Venus. So that's going to be in the morning sky. At the end of the show, we'll show you where to find it over the next 4 months, but it's there now, and if you're up early and look east, you can't miss it, blazing away. Obscured by clouds, to quote a very, very early Pink Floyd song. So we have 2 planets, one on each side of us. We have Earth in the middle, Venus nearer the sun, Mars further away. And boy, talk about 3 different worlds. So we're back in the morning sky tomorrow morning. We still have Mars up there. So right away you can tell that Mars does have visible features that we can see. So Mars definitely is not obscured by clouds like Venus is. But Mars is small, and we're observing Mars through our very, very thick atmosphere. And so it's still really hard to get much detail on the planet Mars. Many have tried. Percival Lowell, for example, went to Arizona and built a whole observatory in the clear Arizona air around the turn of the 20th century just to observe Mars. But it is, like Venus, but for different reasons, a somewhat exasperating sight in a telescope sometimes. So Mars, a thing to know about Mars that a lot of folks don't, is that Mars is really small. So here they are side by side. So Mars is half the size of Earth. So it's only 4,000 miles in diameter, whereas Earth is 8,000 miles in diameter. So it's not a sister in that sense like Venus is to Earth. And being a small world, it also has a very low gravity. So if you weighed 100 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh about 38 pounds on the planet Mars. Very low mass, only 11% of the mass, or the weight, if you could weigh these 2 planets, 11% of the weight of Earth. So that smallness is an important part of Mars's existence. The smallness may be one reason why it couldn't hold much of an atmosphere compared to our home planet, for example. So someone says, how cool does Venus get? I saw that. The very top of Maxwell Montes on Venus, the all-time low on Venus is 715 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the all-time cool. But really on the surface, on the ground at Venus, it's always 870 on Venus. But Mars, we'll be seeing close up in a moment, big variation in temperatures. The thinner your air, generally the more wide your fluctuation in temperature. One more thing that Mars and Earth have in common, they're tilted. So Venus is almost exactly straight up, doesn't have seasons. Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees and Mars is tilted 25 degrees. That tilt creates seasons in both cases. So that's another big similarity that Mars and Earth have that Mars and Venus don't have. So as you look at the planet more close up, so the planet Mars is a little world. It has another thing that Venus, and for that matter Mercury, does not have. It has moons. Now we're pretty sure that these two moons, called Phobos and Deimos, Fear and Terror, are captured asteroids. And that was a real bonus when Mariner 9 in 1971 became the first spacecraft to orbit Mars. By showing us these two moons close up, for the first time ever, they showed us what asteroids look like as well. Those two moons are roughly the size of Manhattan, so in the 20-mile diameter range. They're really small, and 90% likely that they are captured asteroids. Note as well, there are polar caps on Mars, and even from Earth long ago, we noticed that the polar caps did seem to change, to expand and contract with the seasons on Mars. That was one of the first things really tracked in a telescope. So down here on Mars, the air is 100 times as thin as the air on Earth. So that means it's 10,000 times as thin as the air on Venus. But like Venus, the air is mainly carbon dioxide. The air is enough, though, to sustain storms, sometimes storms that wrap the entire planet in a blanket of very fine Martian dust. Now, because Mars has not been geologically active in the same way that Earth and Venus is, the grains, the sand of Mars has gotten finer and finer and finer as time has gone by, just gotten worn down. So the dust of Mars is now very fine and easily blown up into great dust storms by the wind in this thin atmosphere of Mars. So Venus, very active geologically, refreshes its surface every 500 million years. Earth even more so. We replenish our surface thanks to plate tectonics every 100 million years. Mars is far less active. And so a lot of the processes of Mars now that change the landscape is just sheer weight of erosion over the long period. Temperature-wise, actually, so this is for our Seattle friends, Pat and Dave and all. So the warmest it's ever been on Mars is 68 degrees, an average August daytime temperature in Seattle. But that's the exception. Normally the temperature is very cold. About 100 degrees below zero is way more typical. So think of the Elton John song, Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kids. In fact, it's cold as heck. So cold environment, little world as I was saying. But another thing about Mars that's really fascinating is that it has giant geological features, much grander than anything on either Venus or Earth. So here is the biggest mountain in the solar system. It's called Mount Olympus, and it's about 13 miles high. By comparison, the tallest point on Venus, Maxwell Montes, named after James Clerk Maxwell, who I think also inspired the song Maxwell's Silver Hammer by the Beatles, by the way. 7 miles, highest point on Venus. 5 miles, Everest, the highest point on Earth. 13 miles high, the highest point on Mars, this giant extinct volcano, which is about the size of New York State, about 400 miles in diameter. Olympus Mons. We think, we're not sure, but we think that Mars didn't have a lot of plate action even in its early crazy days. So when a volcanic vent emerged, the volcano just got bigger and bigger and bigger over that one vent, making these giant mountains. Now, the argument against that is that there's a chain of mountains close to Mount Olympus that seem to be caused by a moving plate. So it's not entirely off the table that there could have been some plate action on the planet Mars back in its misspent youth. Looking down here also, we have the biggest valley in the solar system, Mariner Valley, named for Mariner 9 as well, that first orbiting mission from the 70s, a giant crack in the crust. Although the tributaries may have been formed by by water that did flow on Mars back in the old days. But the main section of it was created by a quake, much as the Great Rift Valley was in Africa. 3,000 miles long, 4 miles deep, would go all across from New Jersey to California. So little world of giant features, one of the many things that's fascinating about Mars. Now, another thing that's absolutely fascinating about Mars is the fact that it had a lot of water once upon a time, and really makes us wonder, could life have gotten going back in those ancient times? So missions like the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and 2001 Mars Odyssey, observing Mars from orbit, find lots of evidence that water flowed across the surface, whether it's old riverbeds or even areas where water was released by a dam burst and just rushed over the landscape, like you see in the Scablands, for example, of eastern Washington. So there was a time when Mars was not just a red planet, but a blue and red planet. So certainly it raises the question, could life have gotten going back in the old days and then died out when Mars dried out? A little further afield, but you hear it occasionally, if Mars did have life. Now, Mars has got low gravity, right? So if it gets hit by an asteroid, a lot of Mars is going to go into the air and then wind up going around the sun and possibly hitting Earth. So in terms of figuring out whether Mars had ancient life, here's one very successful mission called Curiosity that landed on Mars 8 years ago. In Gale Crater, still exploring Mars close up. And the upcoming mission I'll be talking about in a moment, Perseverance, is modeled and uses a lot of the same technology as this Curiosity mission, which has been roving Mars for 8 years. We've had a rough patch of Mars in the parts of the 90s, but we've had a number of really successful missions to the Red Planet recently. So getting back to ancient life, now what if there was life on Mars in the old days, billions of years ago, and what if a piece of Mars got knocked off and then wound up hitting planet Earth? Could Mars have actually been the source for life forming here on Earth? Could we all, in fact, actually be Martians? It's an interesting question to ponder. That's not likely, but it is more likely that something might have gotten going on Mars in olden times when Mars was covered in water. We do actually have little bits of Mars here on Earth, and we definitely have gotten asteroids or little meteorites that have struck Earth that came from Mars. So in terms of recent missions, 56 missions have been sent towards Mars since the dawn of the space age. And of those 56, 26 of them have been successful. The most recent one here from 2 years ago that NASA landed here is called InSight. It's a geology mission trying to analyze Mars for Marsquakes. Mars is very still now. They're trying to figure out, at one time, Mars had so much crazy geology going on that it made this giant crack of that great Rift Valley on Mars, Mariner Valley. Is there still some activity now? Now, InSight's had some problems in terms of burrowing into the hard soil of Mars, but it is still functional and still doing its research. It also brought along a camera. And even though it wasn't actually mainly a visual mission, cameras nowadays are so great that they send back amazing pictures. So here's a real picture from InSight of Mars. Think of that. It's like looking out your window right now, but you're seeing the planet Mars. They chose a very flat area for this mission. And you may notice that with thin atmosphere, you might expect the sky to be dark blue. The thinner the air gets, generally the darker it gets. There's so much dust in the atmosphere that actually the air on Mars is colored pink. So this is InSight. That was the most recent mission from 2 years ago, from the last close alignment of Mars and of Earth. And we have now 3 missions that are heading towards the planet, one from 3 different countries. So the U.S. mission is called Perseverance. It looks a lot, as you may notice, like the picture of Curiosity that we saw a moment ago. It has been redesigned, though, with more durable wheels. There have been some issues with the wheels of Curiosity. Now, it's hard enough sending a spacecraft that was going to go all the way from Earth to Mars, but imagine having to do it in a time of COVID, because all of the final preparation and then the launch in July was done under this great duress that we've all been under, the COVID crisis. So there's a little plaque on Perseverance as a homage to healthcare workers, the medical staff you see here. And then here we have actually Florida and the launch of Perseverance heading out towards the planet Mars. So an amazing feat under normal circumstances, let alone trying to launch an intricate mission to another planet in the middle of this crisis. The very first moment they had in terms of, so this is the vehicle being packed in. So here is the rover. There's one wheel, another wheel. So you see the rover being packed into its protective shell. It will not see daylight again once this is closed up until it's 6 miles above Mars on the 18th of February, 2021. and then launched, in terms of a launch window, the very first moment it was possible to do a launch, about 7:50 a.m. on July 30 of this year, off it went on its 8-month mission to the planet Mars. So as I was saying, there are other missions going as well. In fact, the United Arab Emirates is launching HOPE, their first mission to the red planet, that left in July as well. And there's also a Chinese mission whose name translates as Sky Questioner, that is a combination orbiter and rover and lander all in one. They've all left in July, all 3 missions, and all are going to arrive in February. So Perseverance on its way. The landing site is going to be north of the equator in what's called Jezero Crater. So Jezero is a word that means lake in certain Slavic languages, and that's because this crater is a former lake. So they figured if you're looking for signs of ancient life on Mars, why not go to an ancient lake bed? This lake was about the size of Lake Tahoe, about 30 miles across or so. Jezero Crater. It's going to go straight on in. It's not going to orbit. It's going to just go heading straight in for a landing. And it's a lake bed that also has rivers, ancient river beds now, that are flowing into it. So the mix of things like sediment and clays seemed like a really good place to find a variegated set of elements that would tell us a lot more about the ancient past on Mars and whether conditions existed for life, and maybe even if we could find evidence that life got going back in ancient times. So when I'm saying Mars was wet, we're talking billions of years ago. It's been a dry planet for billions of years. About 4 billion years ago, though, it was a much wetter planet. Here we have the old river, the bed of the river that flows into Jezero Crater. So it seems to be a really rich environment for seeing a combination. Here again, the riverbed here flowing into the crater itself. The lighter colored areas are the highlands. This circle is about the 6-mile wide landing zone that we're going into. The landing procedure is almost identical to the landing procedure for Curiosity, that 2012 mission. So coming in here, it's been called the 7 minutes of terror because they're out of contact with Earth for the time of the landing. So the folks at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory don't know how the mission's what's happening until it lands. It's in radio silence. Because there is still an atmosphere on Mars, they have to have a shield, a heat shield, to protect it from burning up as it comes in, much as you saw on the old Apollo capsules, and we'll see again on the next generation Orion capsules. So that'll also dissipate some of the heat as the mission is coming in, and then the shield and its heat will be let go as they get to the next stage of the landing. So stage 1 is the shield, and then stage 2 will be parachutes to break the descent. Again, thin air, but thin as the air is, it is enough for parachutes to work, and so that will slow down the descent. And you can see now the lander tucked inside of the shield. You can see the wheels there, finally seeing daylight after being in darkness for nearly a year. And then they drop the parachutes, and there's kind of a cowling over the lander rover that will have the jets that will gently lower the rover to the surface of Mars. So look at how intricate this operation is and all the things that have to happen out of radio contact with Earth for this whole mission to go successfully. I did a big event at Bishop Museum in Hawaii, my last job in 2012 during the Curiosity landing, and it was really nerve-wracking until the first pictures came in, and then we all burst into applause, a whole room full of folks watching the landing. We are hoping to do a watch on the landing here. It's going to happen on February 18 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time on February 18. So it's going to land at that point. No matter what happens that time, you can take to the bank right now. It is locked in. And so the cowling lowers the rover itself onto the surface gently and then gets out of the way so that the cowling doesn't come landing on top of it. And so then there it is. So down there in Jezero Crater. The design, the chassis as it were, is very much along the lines of Curiosity, but the instruments are different here, and they're among the most complex instruments ever created for any mission to any planet. And so one of the key elements is it's going to actually gather about a dozen samples of the Martian soil and store them on board of Perseverance for collection by a later mission to go to Mars. So the arm comes down and burrows into the soil to collect samples. The clean room where these samples will be stored is the cleanest piece of space machinery ever created. It has to be to make sure that there's no contamination with anything else. So it's going to take it on board of Perseverance and store it inside a chamber. And then these Martian samples will sit there in the chamber for years and years for later collection. The plan is to have a combined NASA European Space Agency mission that would go years from now, land close to Perseverance, and then collect these samples, and then return them to Earth so we can examine them in an earthly laboratory. Now, you may have heard also that there's a little helicopter being tested on this mission. It's called Ingenuity, great name for it. So rovers are really expensive, in this case, $2 billion pieces of machinery, and they travel slowly, and you don't want to lose rovers in craters. And so this helicopter is a way of scouting out the area around a rover to see what a safe or interesting direction would be to go in, and also to alert the rover to any craters that might lead to an early end of the mission. So this helicopter is being tested out right now. It will be mainly operational in the first month, from mid-February to mid-March of the mission, and is the first flying vehicle of any kind on any other object in the solar system. So it's in the test phase, but it can be very valuable for future missions as kind of a scout to go and scope around and figure out the most intriguing location to send a rover to. So exciting times coming up. Again, that is the 18th of February is the landing. It's going to go straight on in, so stay tuned for that. Check our website. We would like to, if things evolve in terms of our circumstances, do a watch party for the landing, as I did for Curiosity back in my old joint, the wonderful Bishop Museum and Planetarium in Hawaii. So we wanted to show you, before we wrap our show up, where to look for these planets, to reiterate the fact that it's not just tonight, it's going to be for months that you can see these planets in the sky. Planets do move against a starry background. The word planet comes from planetus, a Greek word meaning wanderer, but Venus is going to be there kind of in the same place in the morning sky all the way from now until the end of the year 2020. So here it is tomorrow morning, Friday the 4th, looking towards 5 o'clock towards the east. You see Venus blazing away at its typical -4 magnitude. And so when you get up and look over towards the east, anytime from now until December, that will be it. It'll be a little lower in the sky if we go to early October, say to the 4th of October. But it will still be there. And of course, it's going to get light later as we go through into the winter time. So you'll have more darkness to catch it before day begins to break. So here's where it will be in October, early October, blazing away. November, it'll also be there in the morning sky, coming up around 5, just before 5, and getting pretty high up, probably 2 hands diameter above the horizon at least before day begins to break. You'll have Venus in the November sky. And then looking east here in December, it's getting a little more dicey. It's right near the horizon at 6 a.m. But boy, in December, here in mid-northern latitudes, day breaks so late that you'll still have nearly an hour to catch it before light begins to flood the land. And then if you're a Venus-ophile, your last chance to catch this morning appearance of Venus will be at the very beginning of 2021. You can just barely catch Venus in early January, say around the 4th, right above where the sun's going to rise here at 7:30. So Venus is going to be there in the morning sky for months and months to come. So check that out. It's going to be a hard time missing it. It's so blazingly bright. It's like an airplane, but it doesn't like come in and land at the airport. That's Venus. Now in terms of Mars, it's also going to be with us. It's actually going to be with us for even longer. So let's go back to the sky tonight to talk about Mars and where to find it. So here the sky is again tonight. Tonight, looking out my window right now, it seems to be kind of clearing up, so one hopes we'll have a good chance to check it out. If you look over towards the south here at 11 o'clock, southeast, you'll see the just past full moon, and then off to one side, already really bright, nearly -2 magnitude, already brighter than any star in the sky. You'll get a good view of the planet Mars coming up. And it has a distinctive, it's not really a red planet. If you see a really red dot, you're seeing an airplane. But it has a distinctive orange color to it from all the red dust that we saw there that's actually on the planet's surface. So that's Mars as you'd see it tonight. Now, night by night, Mars is going to get brighter and brighter, and by mid-October, it's going to peak and be blazingly bright, in fact, even brighter than the planet Jupiter, which only every 2 years and change does Mars ever get to be brighter than Jupiter. But here we are, 11 o'clock, mid-October, October 13. Mars at -2.6 magnitude is brighter than Jupiter is most of the time. So look for that as you're out at mid-evening, blazingly bright. At that time, Mars will come up around sunset, be due south around midnight, set around sunrise. You'll have it all night long as this incredibly bright dot of light. And again, every 2 years and change, we have a really bright appearance of Mars, and this is our bright appearance for 2020. So why is that? That's because Mars is a small planet, so it's not a great reflector of light, and its distance to Earth varies really dramatically. So going back to November of last year, so here it is, November 14, 2019, Earth was there, Mars was there, 2.48 AU. So you're probably saying, AU, what's an AU? AU means astronomical unit. That's the average distance from the Earth to the Sun, 93 million miles. But it's basically at this point, Mars is 230 million miles away from us back in November of last year. So it's just a little faint ember in the morning sky. But as time goes by, Earth on the inside track moves much more quickly than Mars. And so we catch up with Mars and eventually we'll pass Mars. So as we get the clock going, here we are now just about to enter 2020. You see Earth catching up with Mars. And so throughout this entire time, throughout March, April, May, Mars gets brighter and brighter as it did. And then as we get into the early fall, going through the summertime here, Mars goes from being 230 million miles away to being around 42 million miles, 45 million miles away by the time we get to October. So think of that, going from 230 million miles away to only about 45 million miles away. It's going to get brighter and brighter and blaze away. Now, this closeness is also why this year is a good time to launch space missions. Space missions always go off to Mars when we have these favorable gatherings of the two planets. So check that out. That's going to give us a very bright Mars all the way in October and November. But Mars is actually going to be with us all the way until nearly summertime of next year. So every night it'll be a little fainter as we go into 2021. But if you're a Marsophile, your last chance to see Mars will be around mid-June 2021, looking towards the west after the late sunset here in the summertime. Mars at this point, so far away, will be a faint little ember next to the moon. And then you'll, at that point, as you get to the end of June, you'll lose Mars in the light of the sun. So we have a great appearance of both Venus and of Mars blazing away. Venus here till the end of 2020, and then Mars with us until 2021, nearly summertime. But it's going to peak in its brilliance in October and also November. So check those both out. Great chances to see the planets. Planets on a different cycle than the stars. Stars come back at the same time every year. Planets move against the starry background. But right now here we have a wonderful opportunity to catch the planets here in the late summer and the fall and early winter of 2021. And that is the end of our formal program. Let me go ahead and check and see if there's any questions. Again, if you wanted to support us, we do appreciate donations. It keeps us able to do our free programming that we're offering to New Jersey and to the world. And I'm going to go ahead now and just see if there's any questions that we have here that we can address. But that does end the formal part of the program. So Dee is asking, have you ever read Stranger in a Strange Land? So great question there, Dee. So many novels have been written about Mars, of course. There's also the film The Martian recently. So Hyland's book, Stranger in a Strange Land, also talks about, one of the key elements in the plot is talking about the way that the brightness of Mars does vary so directly. And so the brightness of Mars was striking even in that really intriguing piece of science fiction. Now, sort of more in realistic Mars, there's also Arthur C. Clarke's novel, The Sands of Mars, which talks about trying to adapt Mars for human habitation, and also The Martian Chronicles, which is more of a fanciful idea of what Mars would be like, which was by, of course, Ray Bradbury. So many, many novels have been inspired by the planet Mars. So we have a lot of questions about telescopes, and so I really am fond of Orion telescopes. If you check the Orion telescope website, for $125, you can get a tabletop unit that is a really good way to look at the planets like Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and also the moon. Anything in $125 to $250 range is an excellent telescope in terms of the Orion products. So the Orion, the $125 unit, and the $250 unit I highly recommend. We, as you may know if you're members or come to the museum, did a lot of evening observations the last 2.5 years, including having a big Mars party 2 years ago during the close approach of Mars in 2018. And these really sturdy Orion telescopes were really good in terms of both training our volunteers in how to use them and having kids be able to very quickly figure out how to look at the moon or the planets were there. So I would highly recommend do that. Pat's wondering if Mars is uninhabitable, why do you want to go there? Good question. Among all the planets, it's the only option if we did want to explore another world. The planet Mars is the only possible candidate. The planet Venus, as we saw, is absolutely horrendous. I mean, you could maybe imagine something kind of floating up there in the atmosphere of Venus, like the floating city, for example, that we have in certain science fiction movies. But the only planet that's halfway accessible to humans and survivable is the planet Mars. Now, the other issue about going to Mars is that it's a very challenging process. The moon and back took 2 weeks with Apollo in the 1960s and 70s. Going to Mars and back would take about 1,000 days. So you have to be in space or in a Martian environment for 3 years. And that, although we've had astronauts who've been in space for a year at a time on the space station, this is going to be a very, very challenging, light years beyond what the challenges would be for going to the moon, for example. Some questions on Venus motion. I don't think I mentioned, but Venus is weird in so many ways. So it takes 243 Earth days for Venus to orbit, to spin around once on its axis. So Venus takes 243 days for one full rotation, one quote day unquote. And yet a year on Venus is only 227 days. And so as Venus goes around the sun, it hasn't even finished a single rotation by the time its year is over. Although from sunrise to sunrise on Venus, if you can see the sun through the haze, it's only 116 days. Still very long days on Venus, long days on Mercury, and then the other planets have more typical short days. Day on Mars is only 37 minutes longer than a day on Earth, 24 hours and 37 minutes. Okay, Reeves is wondering, why does Jupiter have a red spot? So Jupiter, like all the outer planets, is just a giant ball of gas. Jupiter spins very quickly, so it's sort of the anti-Venus, right? Venus takes 243 days to spin around once. It takes less than 10 hours. It takes 9 hours and 50 minutes for Jupiter to spin around once. It still is radiating heat from the inside, and that rapid rotation and the heat create all these storms on the planet Jupiter. And unlike on Earth, when a hurricane forms on Jupiter, there is no solid surface to break it up. So the red spot is just a hurricane that's nearly twice the size of Earth, that's hundreds of years old, maybe millions of years old. We don't know. The first confirmed observations of it in telescopes that were good enough to see the red spot were about 200 years ago. But hurricanes last for virtually forever on a big gas planet because there's no encounter with land to break it up. Let's see, someone's asking where the other rover goes. The cowling that's dropping Perseverance is just a dropping mechanism, and then it's getting out of the way. Although the Chinese mission, actually, it's the 3-in-1 show. The Sky Questioner from China is going to have a lander that's going to land on the plains of Utopia, not far away from where the Viking 2 lander from the US landed in the bicentennial summer of 1976. And it's not, there have been a few occasions when one lander lands kind of close to the other. The ultimate is that Apollo 12 landed close to a robotic mission called the Lunar Surveyor, so close the astronauts could actually trundle over and visit this robot that had landed years before on the moon. And that's the idea behind the return mission for Perseverance. They're going to land a rover close to it in future years and have it trundle over and collect samples from the Perseverance. It's a really intriguing idea. The Ingenuity, like who would have thought that we could go to the planets, let alone be able to land these kind of devices, let alone collect samples from a planet, and then return them to Earth and study them in an Earth laboratory. How hot is Venus? So yes, 870 degrees Fahrenheit all the time. Again, unless you climb up Maxwell Montes, that 7-mile high mountain, and then the temperature plunges to 715 degrees Fahrenheit. But yeah, so when things open up here and you plan your next vacation, I wouldn't be putting Venus in my future travel plans. So I did want to mention also that we've done 23 of these shows, and if you want to see any of them, just go to LSC in the House, and they're all there. So we did a show called All About Mars that goes more into the science fiction history and the appointments of Mars in the arc of history. We did an alien show where Mars also comes up because it's important to the search for life. Our Sky Tonight show from last week goes into both the constellations and the planets that you can see in September. So all of these are stored there, so we have 20 hours for your viewing pleasure there. So we're coming to the end here. I'm going to see if there's any more questions I can address. So here's one last. Michelle's wondering, what if the sun is so big it explodes? The sun is going to, in 5 billion years, not quite explode, but it's going to puff off its outer layers of gas, and those layers of gas will get all the way out to where the Earth is, and the sun itself in the middle will then shrink down to a white dwarf. So our star is not big enough to blow up, but it will come to an end in about 5 billion years, puffing off its outer layers of gas, and then we on Earth will be inside of that gas ring, as will Venus and Mercury as well. Well, all right, so we're hitting the 2 o'clock hour, so we're coming to the end of our program. Again, if you want to support us, we do appreciate donations. If you're near us, either this weekend or anytime in the foreseeable future, check our website for the days we're open. Right now, we're planning as of Saturday to be open 4 days a week, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday. So Thursday through Sunday with planetarium shows in September, every hour on the hour for the time that we're open. We're doing a show about the planets to tie into what's going on here with the great planet arrangement in the sky. And we're doing a deep space show as well to take advantage of all this great deep space content that our team has created over the last few months. So with that, thank you again for joining us. And you can come back and join us next week when Andrew will be revisiting one of the most requested topics we ever get, black holes. So that'll be our show next week. Until then, have a great week, and maybe I'll see some of you at Liberty Science Center as we open this weekend. Thank you, everybody.